Hello everyone, welcome back to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly, and this week I am looking at a deck called DFF FFX, or the City of Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy X. So first up, there are a couple of placeholder cards in the deck, because at the moment on FFX, the DFF cards from the DFF box are not yet in, well, DFF decks. DFF decks? Might as well be that at the moment. But yeah, so I've had to put a couple of placeholders in, but you get the idea, and you know, the cards are fairly well known at this point, and they have some decent effects as well. So yeah, I'll start with the backups, move on to the forwards, and then we've got the summons and monsters as well. So backups, we have obviously Buddy to start with, because he can search pretty much every other backup in the deck. So you've got Riku, 3 of, Kimahri, 3 of, and a 1 of Barreleye. So the reason I've got 3 of literally every 10 backup except for Barreleye is because of the fact that I want to be able to play them as quickly as I can. And yes, I could have more Dragoons, I could have more Oracles, and those are multiplayer as well, but I then don't want to be taking up the space of my Final Fantasy X backups. So just being able to spam that many backups out and making sure that they are 10 backups. I think so an edit I didn't make to this, I apologise, is actually I took one Kimahri out and I put in a Len, the 2CP summoner backup, where if you've cast a summon you can pay 1 gold to then draw a card. So apologies, there are 2 Kimahri and 1 Len, but still the same amount of backups, and technically 1 more additional FF10 character. But yeah, I want them to be searchable off of Buddy. Kimahri has a really, really potent effect, which is really relevant because setting damage to 0 by both summons and abilities is really useful. And there are lots of forwards in this deck that you want to protect, as well as having protection from Auron, being able to protect, you know, other things as well is quite nice. Barreleye I actually threw in as well because firstly he's a 2CP backup, but being able to activate 2 of your forwards as well is really useful, especially when you've got quite a few big you've got some big forwards in the deck, so being able to attack with those without fear of blocking, but then also be able to attacking them without your fear of your opponent blocking, but then be able to use Barreleye to then make them block in your turn as well. It's very useful. And yeah, similarly, just Dragoon and Oracle, just want those crystals really because it's DFF, so yeah, I'm going to be using crystals. Alright, moving on to the forwards. So we have Auron. Obviously, he is a pretty big staple in just mono water regardless, or any deck running water. Just having a lightning rod that takes the abilities or summons is very, very useful. Now, obviously, board-wide damage or effects are pretty prevalent as well, so it means that he can't protect against those. But if you use something like Kimahri on Auron, it means that, you know, ultimately he can't be taken out through damage unless your opponent uses something like, I don't know, is it number 1-2A or Ku Chaspel, you know, to be able to stop it from damage being reduced, or just outright breaking as well, of course. But either way, he also gets 2 cards when he dies if you control another Guardian or someone as well. I don't need to know what Auron does, but ultimately it's a very, very useful card that can be played back with Unit as well. Walker, again, pretty obvious card. He can really easily get up to 3 real counters, at which point you can then use Auric Spirit S to then just kill stuff, and it's a really, really good effect because it's choose one forward, lose all its abilities until the end of the turn, break it. So losing the abilities is great because it means if there's an enter the break zone effect or something about it leaving the field, it doesn't get that effect as well. Now, his S ability, he is a 2CP forward. There's only 3 of him. I say only 3. There are 3 of them in the deck, but I have Asura in the deck, a couple of Asura, which means that you can use his S ability, use Asura to get him back, and then use his S ability again if you wanted to. Pain, really, really useful card. Really not hard to get to 3 Final Fantasy X characters as well, because as I mentioned earlier, you've got Kimahri, Len, Riku, Buddy, and then obviously she counts herself as well. So when she enters the field, choose 2 cards from either player's break zone. If you control 3 or more category X characters, remove them from the game and draw 1 card. So you not only get to remove something, you get to draw a card as well. So, and she's above curve because also she's a multi-element, but still not too bad, and very, very useful against certain decks that like to just, you know, refund from the break zone. So this is the first placeholder, so Unit and Tidus. It's not actually Unit and Tidus, it is the Tidus from the DFF deck. So he is a 5CP EX Burst 9k wind forward with the text when he enters the field. Choose one forward your opponent controls, return to the opponent's hand. So forward of any element, of any cost, and you just return it. And then when a forward your opponent is returned to their hand, you draw a card and gain a crystal. So if you play them onto the field, bounce something, you also get a card and you draw a crystal as well. If you've watched my my review of the box, then some of these combos will be known to you. But ultimately, he's a Guardian, which means that he is also buffed by Yuna when she's bigger, and it also means if Orin dies when Tidus is there, you also get a card as well. Alright, next up we have Strago. So, pay a crystal, dull, choose one 40 opponent controls, return to its owner's hand, draw one card. So that's quite funny, obviously, because with Tross on the field and with Tidus on the field, it means that you will get to draw 3 cards, gain a crystal, and you'll have returned a 40 opponent's hand, which is really, really good considering all we've done is dull Strago. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can use Barrel Eye to activate forwards. So choose up to 2 forwards, activate them. You've also got Asura as well to be able to activate, so it might be a case that you dull Strago, bounce something, draw a card, you can then reactivate Strago, dull him again, and because you've dulled him, and if you've got Tidus on the field, you gain that crystal back, even if you only have the 1 crystal, provided Tidus is there to see the forward be bounced, you gain that crystal back, you can then reactivate Strago, use him again with that crystal. Now, there's only 1 in the deck, because ultimately it's a bit of a tough sell, because, I mean, this card hasn't ever really seen play. I don't think I've ever seen anyone play it. But, you know, if you can have Strago on the field for a turn, you then play Tidus onto the field, and then use Strago. You know, you get to bounce, well, 2 things because you played Tidus, but, you know, the longer they're there, the more horrible of a persistent effect they have. Lena, so lots of crystals in the deck, so you want a means of actually spending those crystals. Strago is 1, Lena is another, and yeah, getting 3 crystals, really not that hard, and the sheer breadth of forwards you can play back onto the field. You've got Lulu to play back, which obviously gets you a summon back to your hand, Strago as well, unlikely, but still you could. Not Yuna and Tidus. You've got Pain, you've got Waka, you've got Orin, and then this Warrior of Light is actually the 2 CP Warrior of Light, which gains crystals for DFF forwards. So you're actually kind of, I guess, limited on your 3 costs, but I can't remember, does she say 3 or less? Or just 3? 2 or less, 3 or less. So you could choose 2 costs, which is really, really nice. But ultimately, if you've got a Lulu in the break zone, there are 3 in the deck, you'll probably be playing Lulu because, again, gets you something back to hand. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a summon. It could be a Yuna you get back to hand. And that's a really big swing in your favour. So, yeah, let's say, hypothetically, you've got Warrior of Light already on the field. Or Waka on the field. Or any of these forwards, right? You play Lena, you then bring in, I don't know, let's say you've already got Warrior Light on the field. You play Lena to play Waka to then play Lulu. Waka enters the field. He gains a crystal. Lulu enters the field. He gains a crystal. He gains a counter. And Warrior of Light gains you a crystal. You then get back, say, Yuna from your break zone to then play Yuna onto the field. To then play Orin onto the field. You've then got, I think, like 4 counters on Waka at this point. And obviously, Warrior of Light, the normal DFF Warrior Light, only gives you 1 crystal per turn, so you'd only gain the 1, but still, that's a pretty big swing. And if you're at damage 3, the Yuna will also be buffing all your Guardians as well, so not too shabby. But yeah, Lena ultimately one of the best crystal users in the deck, and generally in the game, because we have to play 2 things back onto the field for a total of 3 crystals. It's very, very strong, and anyone who's played with the DFF deck knows how strong that is, because Onion Knight and Shantoto in Fire and Ice, both very powerful to either search and play, or just to play from your break zone. Lulu, yeah, as I mentioned before, being able to get back a summon to your hand or be able to get back a Yuna to your hand, both very important effects. And, you know, just being able to set something to 5k as well is quite nice. Now, there aren't actually any means of killing anything in this deck using Lulu's effect, so yeah, that kind of sucks. But ultimately, I wanted to focus more on the bounce effect, because keeping on bouncing things and just removing things from your opponent's field is an absolute pain in the arse. Now, one of the combos I do like is that if you Lena into Lulu and you decide to get back this Leviathan, it then means you can free cast the Leviathan, because you've obviously played Lena onto the field, which then bounces something, can't be replayed in your opponent's turn. So yeah, very, very nice. Obviously, it could be, you know, something else coming into the field, and then Lulu to get back the Leviathan as well if you really wanted to, but yeah. But yeah, Lulu's got a selection of 9 summons in total, so, you know, about 1/5 of the deck, just less than, so she should have a good job being able to actually, you know, replay summons. Next up we have the Warrior of Light, again from the DFF starter deck. So he enters the field, or a DFF forward enters the field, you gain a crystal, and then you can also spend one of the crystals to buff himself by 1k and make it so it can't be targeted by abilities. I mean, that's fine. He's weirdly persistent because obviously you can just keep on protecting himself from his own crystals, and crystals aren't hard to come by, but a strange amount of the forwards from the Final Fantasy X starter deck are actually DFF as well. So not Orin, not Waka, Not Pain, she wasn't in the starter deck anyway. So the Tidus is, because obviously he's from the DFF starter deck. Strago is, so it means you can gain a crystal from that. Lena isn't. Lulu is. The Warrior Light obviously counts himself when he enters. Yuna is. The Cloud that I've included in this deck is obviously the DFF Cloud as well. And then Jekt, also DFF. So, you know, there are a fair few DFF forwards in this deck that actually can get generate crystals with the Warrior of Light. And protecting himself again, it's very nice. Right, next up we have Yuna. So, yep, she enters the field. If you've taken 5 points of damage, you get to choose 2, but ultimately she either activates all your backups, or you choose a Guardian of 2 or less in your break zone, play it onto the field, damage 3, or your Guardian gains +2. So this is one of the main reasons that I didn't include the Cecil in this deck, which buffs all your DFF wards, because obviously you've got Yuna buffing your Guardians by 2000 as well. Now, having 2 buffers that can buff your field by 2k is very, very powerful. But this deck really likes tribalism and likes having lots of the same forwards, and ultimately I would be eating into either some of my removal in the deck, or I'd be eating into some of those tribal forwards. If I were to remove something from this deck to put the Cecil in, it would probably be something. Well, I mean, I could easily get rid of Strago, right? And maybe a Pain as well. So at least knocks up our wind count as well, because we are I say only 26, that's still over half, but you know, multi-element forwards, which is actually kind of fake now I think on it, because that means it thinks there are 3 more water forwards than there actually are when there aren't. But yeah, you could easily put the Cecil in the deck if you wanted to, but ultimately I played it like this and it operates fine. And yeah, being able to buff all your Guardians by +2 is really useful. It's also worth noting as well that there's only a couple of forwards that would gain +2 off of Cecil anyway, so there would be obviously the Warrior of Light and the Cloud. But I mean, the Warrior of Light would only be knocked up to a 7k anyway, so you can make him an 8k if you use one of his crystals, which then starts threatening a lot more forwards with blocking or attacking. And similarly with Cloud would become an 11k, which is quite nice, but still, I think the fact that I've got, you know, the Yuna, who's a 9k, who then becomes an 11, and similarly Jekt will also become a 9k, 11k as well, so I didn't really see the need to add the Cecil in, even though he's got his own form of protection. And that actually is kind of funny as well, because if you do have the Cecil, that gains obviously his own protection, but then you've got Auron on the field, that means he's doubly as hard to get rid of. But generally the answer to those 2 forwards would just be, I'm going to board wipe you then, because it doesn't worry about targeting, so, you know, they still die. Again, damage, if it's damage based, then, you know, you could be using Kimari, and, you know, that might be able to protect your Auron, and obviously Cecil doesn't take damage from abilities, but he could still take damage from summons, so maybe you want to use Kimari on the Cecil to make sure he doesn't take damage from summons either. That could be quite nice. Anyway, enough of the Cecil that isn't in this deck. Next up we have Cloud. So again, not this card, DFF Cloud, and you can pay 2 crystals to cast him onto the field without paying his cost. When he enters the field, deal 3k for each DFF forward on the field at the time, or on your field at the time. And as I mentioned before, lots of DFF forwards, and it's quite easy to be able to spam them onto the field. Again, using stuff like Lena and Yuna to be able to play things from your break zone. And there's just lots of DFF forwards. Again, you know, you got Yuna, Strago, Lulu, Warrior Light. Sorry, not Yuna, Tidus. Cloud will count himself as well, and then the Jekt as well. And as I mentioned before, it's quite nice to be able to have all these forwards on the field and just recur themselves. Right, next up we have Jekt. So a similar sort of thing to the Cloud, but a bit more reliable, because when he enters the field, choose one forward opponent controls, deal it 4,000 damage, and then 1,000 more for each category 10 character you control. So let's say you've got Buddy, Riku, Kimari, and Len, and Baralai. I mean, that's already 9k. That's really, really good. That's just if he resolves off in the X as well. If you play him onto the field, that's 10k. Obviously, you have got Riku, which allows you to be able to play the Jekt onto the field. Now, in terms of obviously playing Cloud, you just pay the 2 crystals. 2 crystals are very easy to come by. So yeah, just free play him. That's one of the reasons in there. Also, he's an EX as well, so he'll probably kill something. But yeah, Jekt ultimately can be played onto the field and deal stupid amounts of damage and probably kill something. Now, put Jekt into the break zone, search for one light or dark character added to your hand. There's an argument to be made about putting the Barts into the deck as well, because when he enters the field, you get a crystal, and then you can remove him from your break zone to also gain a crystal, which would be quite nice, and you can, you know, Jekt to get the Barts, play Barts onto the field, search a DFF character, play that. But actually, I think if I was going to put a light or dark character into this deck, it would actually probably be Vanera Fens, because she's a dark character, so she can be searched off checked, but her cost is reduced by 1 for each crystal you control, and she can become 0 when she attacks. She does minus 5k to your opponent's board. That's pretty significant. Now, if you cast a summon with Lulu on the field, set it to 5k, attack with Vanilla Fens, pay one of the crystals, that forward is now dead. So there is a means of, setting things to 5k using Lulu's effect. So, quite nice. And that is the forwards. Yeah, like I said, with Jack, there's loads of different good forwards, or different good light or dark cards that you could put into the deck for Jack to search, but ultimately, Arts or Vanilla Fens are the 2 top tier ones for me. Right, next up we have Asura. Stupid amount of 2 cost forwards that you want to be able to get back to your hand. Also, just activating backups, activating your forwards, because Asura is strong. Kuchulain. Never underestimate the power of blanking something. If something's got a really annoying persistent effect, or maybe your opponent's playing something like Vice and they'll make you discard. If you can't stop the discard, at least you can blank him to then make it so that you won't get something done unfrozen from the discard. Also, Kuchulain gives you a card, so it might be a good card to discard as well. But yeah, ultimately, blanking something, really, really useful. And it's a cheap summon as well, which means that it really, really capitalizes on Lulu setting something to 5k. Chocobo, bouncing thing back to your hand, always fun. Yeah, there's not much more to say about it, obviously. I actually did a couple of times bounce the Tidus back to my hand. He's a 5 CP forward, but still, being able to bounce Chocobo back to, or being able to use Chocobo to bounce him back to your hand gives you a card. You then play Tidus back onto the field. Now, what's nice with this is the fact that if you're bouncing one of your opponent's forwards through that replay of Tidus, he's a new instance of Tidus, so that means you get another crystal and another card, because he does have the effect of you get a crystal and a card when something's bounced, but only the first time that happens, so only once per turn. So bouncing back to your hand, replaying back onto the field, you get the effect again. Leviathan, only one of this one because it's a little more niche, but it does have some really nice effects if you want to. So again, choose one forward, return to its own hand. It's unmitigated bounce, but still really useful. Choose one action ability, cancel its effect. So maybe your opponent wants to make a monster into a forward. Obviously, it wouldn't work with Genova Dreamweaver, because you can be targeted by summons. Actually, you're targeting the action ability, not the summon, so that would still work with Genova Dreamweaver if the opponent tries to animate them. But yeah, ultimately, there could be stupid amounts of action abilities. Just cancel it with Leviathan. And then ultimately, there's no ultimate here. During this turn, the forward you control don't receive damage from summons. So obviously, you've got Kamari that can protect things, but having Leviathan just stop, I don't know, a salamander or something like that. What is there? There's Hecaton Shear, obviously, Fat Chocobo as well. So being able to Leviathan, which is fairly cheap in comparison to either of those 2 summons, it's not too bad. Then we've got this Leviathan. As I mentioned before, you play a water forward onto the field, you then freecast this, bounce something, and then can't be played on the following turn. So remember, using this Leviathan, if you use it on your opponent's turn, obviously the next turn is then yours, and then the turn after that goes back to your opponent, they can then replay that forward, because Leviathan reads, choose one 40 opponent controls, return to its owner's hand until the end of the next turn. Your opponent cannot cast any copies of it. So if you use it on your opponent's turn, the end of the next turn is the end of your turn, which means that on their turn they can recast it. So always try to make sure to use this Leviathan on your turn. And then finally, 6 cost Leviathan. I actually never ever use this card because I don't really play water that much, despite it being actually quite fun. But it's an EX, so that makes it immediately very strong with 2 options. But bounce something, again, get a card off of Tross, Warrior of Light. And then you also get a card back from your break zone. Choose a water forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. Or you could just put a light or dark forward at the top or bottom of his own stack. So, yeah, always nice. And then finally, we have Tross as well. So, it might be a case that you've used all your Leviathans, or you don't have a Strago on the field or whatever, but you still got Tross, you've still got Warrior of Light, you still got Tidus, sorry. Just make Tross a forward, attack, bounce something, get 2 cards and a crystal to hand. That's really, really good. And that's the DFF FFX deck. I can't remember how F's I put in there. And yeah, it runs surprisingly well. You just need to be able to build your backups and create a stable line. And, running 14 backups is not low. Well, it's not low by today's standards, but it is low traditionally. You've got Buddy to be able to search all those other things and lots of the same backups. So, you should have a good chance of getting something that you need onto the field. But still, you need to be careful. Don't make the mistake that I did, where you play Buddy to then get Riku to then play Riku. Ultimately, yes, Riku can be used to cast any FF10 card, but if you've got something like Strago or Lana in your hand, you don't have any water backups. So probably go for Kimari or Len. That was another reason I put Len in the deck as well, is because, you know, going straight in from Buddy into Kimari and you don't have any forwards feels really bad. So having Len there means you have another option to be able to play the water backup. But yeah, how would you guys change up this deck? What would you put in? I think there's definitely something to be said about putting in Cecil and probably the Barts as well. But then you start eating into some of your important cards. And again, Orin's important, Wakka's important. Tidus is very important, actually, surprisingly, because he is an EX removal, which is very useful. Yes, your opponent gets to replay stuff, so if they, you know, your opponent sends something like Ice or Fire or Lightning, where they have really strong entry effects of breaking stuff or freezing stuff or discarding, yeah, you may not want that to happen. But still, if it's an EX burst and your opponent bounces back to their hand, they can't replay it for whatever reason. That's one less card for you to have to worry about. Yeah, I mean, you could also choose some different card crystal spenders as well if you wanted to, or crystal generators. You could have the Sarah, is it Sarah Mobius, I think? When she enters reveal top card, if it's a backup, you get a crystal, I think, or something like that. But yeah, let me know how you would change up. What would you put in the deck? What would you change out? Would you may have more variants in the backups? What different summons might you change there? Because, you know, you could probably have six. You could have 3 of the 6-cost Leviathan as well. Maybe take some of them out as well. I did actually consider, I think the card is called like Garam Care or something like that. It's a 3 CP wind summon, which you can reduce its cost to 1 by using Crystal, which is nice. But ultimately, it can bounce a forward of 2, I think. Which obviously means you can bounce your opponent's forward to 2, which means that would trigger either Truss or Tidus. I can't get my names out today. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this deck. Let me know what you changed, what you put in. Make sure to like and subscribe. It makes a big difference to the channel. See you in the next video.